Republicans in the Senate have killed a resolution that would have put limits on President Trump's ability to take action in Venezuela. 5 Republicans had broken rank last week to advance a war powers measure, many concerned about the possibility President Trump would order troops on the ground in Venezuela. One of those senators, Missouri's Josh Hawley, spoke before the vote about what changed his mind.
I've had multiple very substantive discussions on this issue over the last 5 days. And, what the administration told me all the time was, they said, we think that this ties our hands. And I said, my concern is ground troops in Venezuela without congressional authorization. And they said, well, we don't want to do that.
Okay, so Trump is absolutely losing his mind right now because his own party keeps voting against him in the Senate. And I'm not talking about some meaningless symbolic vote or procedural nonsense. I'm talking about Republicans actually joining Democrats to slap down Trump's war powers push and his tariff emergency declarations, with Trump responding by melting down on social media and reportedly screaming at Republican senators behind closed doors that they're traitors who should never be elected again. Now let's be really clear about something important here, because there's some confusion about what's actually happening. Trump is not facing a new impeachment vote right now. He's not being dragged into some dramatic impeachment trial where the Senate is about to remove him from office. What's actually happening is somehow even more embarrassing for Trump, because it shows his grip on his own party is weaker than people thought. The Senate just voted 52-47 to advance a bipartisan resolution that would bar Trump from using military force in or against Venezuela without congressional approval. And 5 Republicans broke ranks to vote with every single Democrat to advance this thing. 5 Republicans said no to Trump on a major foreign policy and war powers issue. And Trump is furious about it because it exposes that he can't even keep his own party in line on the issues he cares most about. And this isn't a one-time thing. Back in October 2025, 5 Republicans also joined Democrats to revoke Trump's emergency tariff powers on Brazil, rolling back his 50% tariffs in what was described as a rare and sharp bipartisan rebuke of his trade strategy. So we've got a clear pattern emerging. Trump declares some emergency or tries to use executive authority to threaten war or impose massive tariffs, and then enough Republicans join with Democrats to vote against him and embarrass him, even though the final outcome might get blocked by the House or by Trump's veto. And the fact that this keeps happening tells you something important about where Trump's presidency is right now. He's not the unstoppable force controlling every Republican who's terrified to cross him. He's actually pretty weak when it comes to issues that touch war, trade, and voters' wallets. Republicans are willing to defy him when they think his actions are going to hurt them back home or drag the country into conflicts that nobody wants.
Put a lot of thought behind considering ICE's actions in other cities, including hers in the Chicago area. So she says she has 70 co-sponsors for this measure, that this is really about accountability on the part of Secretary Noem, that she needs to leave office and leave her post. The Department of Homeland Security, for its part, though, said that, look, the Secretary and the Department simply trying to do its job here. The DHS is a law enforcement agency enforcing the rule of law passed by Congress. So obviously, with Republicans in the majority, unclear that this will really advance or go anywhere. Speaker Mike Johnson already condemning this move on the part of Democrats.
Let's start with the Venezuela war powers vote, because it's the most recent example, and it's the one that has Trump spiraling right now. On January 8, 2026, the Senate voted to advance a bipartisan war powers resolution that would explicitly bar Trump from using U.S. military forces within or against Venezuela without getting congressional approval first. According to reporting, the vote was 52-47, which means 5 Republicans had to cross party lines and vote with all the Democrats to get this thing to advance. Now, this isn't the final vote that actually restricts Trump's war powers. There are more procedural steps. The House would have to pass it, and then Trump would probably veto it, and Congress would need a veto override, which they probably can't get. But the significance here isn't whether this becomes law tomorrow. The significance is that 5 Senate Republicans were willing to publicly vote against Trump on a major commander-in-chief and national security issue. And Trump's response shows he understands how embarrassing that is, and what it signals about his control slipping. According to the LA Times, Trump blasted those GOP senators afterward, saying they should be ashamed and should never be elected again. And he claimed the vote hampers American self-defense and national security by stripping his commander-in-chief authority. And reportedly, according to sources speaking to multiple outlets, Trump has been calling Republican senators directly and screaming at them about disloyalty and betrayal, trying to intimidate them into changing their positions before any final votes happen. Now, let's talk about why this Venezuela war powers issue even came up, and why some Republicans decided to break with Trump. Trump has been escalating rhetoric and pressure toward Venezuela throughout his second term, talking about the country as a threat to American interests, suggesting military action might be necessary to deal with the Maduro regime, and making not-so-subtle threats about using American power to reshape governments in the region. And a lot of Republicans have been uncomfortable with this, partly because they remember how disastrous Iraq was, and how U.S. interventions in Latin America have historically backfired, and partly because their constituents don't want another endless conflict draining resources and lives. So when Trump started making moves that looked like he was setting up for military action in Venezuela without consulting Congress or getting authorization, some Republicans decided they needed to draw a line and reassert Congress's constitutional role in war powers. And the fact they were willing to do this publicly, in a recorded vote where Trump and his base would see exactly who voted against him, tells you these senators decided the political risk of crossing Trump was worth it compared to the risk of letting him drag the country into an unauthorized war that could become a total disaster. According to reporting, the Republicans who voted with Democrats included senators who generally try to stay in Trump's good graces, but decided this issue was important enough to risk his wrath. And that calculation is important because it suggests Trump's hold on Republican voters isn't as absolute as he thinks. There are issues where Republican voters will actually support their senators defying Trump if they think Trump is steering the country in a dangerous direction. Now here's where it gets really interesting from a constitutional and political standpoint. Trump's argument is basically that as commander-in-chief, he has unlimited authority to use military force however and wherever he wants, and that Congress trying to restrict him is unconstitutional and dangerous because it ties his hands. But that's not what the Constitution says, or how war powers are supposed to work. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, the power to fund military operations, and the power to regulate the armed forces. The President is commander-in-chief, which means he directs military operations once war has been authorized. But he's not supposed to unilaterally start wars without congressional approval, except in genuine emergencies where the country is under immediate attack. And Venezuela is not attacking the United States. There's no emergency requiring immediate military response. So Trump arguing that Congress can't restrict his ability to use force there is basically Trump arguing for presidential power that goes way beyond what the Constitution actually allows. The senators who voted for the War Powers Resolution understand that. They're not trying to weaken America's ability to defend itself. They're trying to make sure decisions about war and peace run through the constitutional process, with Congress having a say, not just through presidential whim where Trump can threaten conflict because he's angry at foreign leaders or because he thinks it helps him politically. And Trump's furious response to this vote tells you everything about how he views power and accountability. He doesn't think Congress has any legitimate role in checking him. He doesn't think Republican senators should ever vote against him, even when they believe he's wrong. He thinks loyalty to him personally should override their constitutional obligations and their responsibility to their constituents. When Trump says these senators should never be elected again, what he's really saying is that Republicans who won't rubber stamp him deserve punishment. That's an authoritarian mindset, where dissent is treated as betrayal. And the fact that 5 Republican senators voted against him anyway suggests that at least some Republicans are getting tired of that dynamic and are willing to reassert independence, even if it means dealing with Trump's tantrums. This could be the beginning of a broader pattern, where more Republicans decide the costs of enabling Trump's worst impulses outweigh the costs of occasionally defying him, especially on issues where they think he's leading the party and the country in dangerous directions. Now, let's talk about the Brazil tariff vote, because it shows this isn't just Venezuela. Back in October 2025, according to NPR, the Senate voted to revoke Trump's emergency-based tariff powers on Brazil, specifically rolling back the 50% tariffs he imposed using emergency authority. And just like with the Venezuela vote, 5 Republicans broke ranks and joined Democrats to pass it. Again, the House didn't pass it, and Trump would have vetoed it anyway, so the tariff stayed in place for a while. But the symbolic importance was huge. It was described as a rare and sharp bipartisan rebuke of his trade strategy, and it showed Republican senators were willing to cross Trump on economic policy when they thought his tariff wars were hurting farmers, manufacturers, and consumers in their states. These aren't abstract ideological disagreements. These are votes where senators looked at the economic damage Trump's policies were causing to their constituents and decided they couldn't just go along with it anymore, even if it meant defying the president. The Brazil tariff situation is part of Trump's broader pattern of using emergency declarations and national security justifications to impose tariffs without going through normal trade processes or getting Congress involved. Trump loves tariffs. He thinks they make him look tough and protect industry. But the problem is the way he uses them has been chaotic and damaging, slapping massive tariffs on trading partners based on vague claims, then using those tariffs as leverage, then changing them depending on politics. That creates uncertainty for businesses that don't know what trade policy will look like month to month. It hurts farmers when other countries retaliate and export markets shrink, and it raises prices for consumers who ultimately pay the costs through higher prices. So Republican senators from farm states and manufacturing states have been hearing from constituents who are getting hammered by these tariff fights, and some decided they needed to vote to revoke Trump's emergency tariff powers to send a message that this approach isn't working. And here's the thing about these votes on both war powers and tariffs. They reveal a fundamental tension inside the Republican Party: loyalty to Trump personally versus representing constituents' interests and exercising constitutional responsibilities. Trump demands absolute loyalty. He punishes deviation. He treats any vote against him as betrayal. But senators have to face voters, and they have to answer to people getting hurt by these policies. They have to think about political survival and about their legacy beyond being Trump enablers. So on issues where Trump's actions cause real harm or real concern among Republican voters, like threatening unnecessary war or imposing economically damaging tariffs, some senators are deciding their obligation to their constituents and their duties outweigh fear of Trump's retribution. That doesn't mean they're anti-Trump or that they'll oppose him on everything. It means they're picking specific issues where they think he's wrong and where they think defying him is actually good politics in their states, even if it angers Trump and his hardcore supporters. According to reporting from multiple outlets, there's a wider pattern of Republicans rejecting Trump on numerous congressional votes throughout 2025 and into 2026. It's not just Venezuela and Brazil. There have been multiple instances where enough Republicans join Democrats to advance legislation Trump opposes, block things he wants, or constrain his executive authority in various ways. Some of these votes are domestic policy, some are spending, some are regulatory. And while Trump still wins most votes because Republicans control the House, and most Senate Republicans still vote with him most of the time, the fact he keeps losing these occasional votes shows his grip on the party isn't nearly as total as it seemed after 2024. There are limits to how far Republicans will follow him. There are issues where senators prioritize other considerations over Trump loyalty. There are situations where the political calculation shifts and suddenly it makes more sense to defy him than enable him. And Trump clearly hates that. He wants total control. He wants every Republican voting with him all the time. He views any defection as intolerable betrayal. But he's not getting that. Now, we should be clear about the limitations of these Senate votes and why they haven't actually stopped Trump from doing most of what he wants. Even when the Senate votes to restrict war powers or revoke tariff authorities, those resolutions still have to pass the House. And the House is controlled by Republicans who are generally more pro-Trump and less willing to cross him. And even if both chambers pass these resolutions, Trump would veto them. Overriding a veto requires 2/3 majorities that just aren't there. So in practical terms, these votes are often symbolic. They embarrass Trump. They show he doesn't have unanimous support. They create political pressure. They show cracks in unity, but they don't automatically tie his hands legally. What they do create is an environment where Trump's actions are contested and where those cracks are visible. And that matters for future fights and future accountability efforts, even if the immediate legal impact is limited. So now let's dig into what this means for Trump's control over the Republican Party and what it tells us about potential future accountability mechanisms heading into the 2026 midterms. The big picture is that Trump's presidency is revealing itself to be weaker and more constrained than it initially appeared. Republicans aren't automatically rubber stamping everything. They're willing to vote against him on issues that matter to constituents or raise serious constitutional concerns. And that matters enormously because it means there's space for real oversight and real accountability if the political conditions shift even slightly. Right now, Democrats don't control either chamber, so their ability to investigate Trump is limited. But if Democrats win even one chamber in 2026, suddenly you've got real oversight power, where committees can investigate, subpoenas have teeth, and Republicans, who are already uncomfortable with some of Trump's actions, might be willing to join bipartisan investigations if they think it's politically safe. The Venezuela and Brazil votes show there are at least 5 Republican senators who will vote against Trump when they think he's overreaching on war powers or economic policy. That's not enough to remove him from office in an impeachment trial. You'd need 67 votes, and we're nowhere near that. But it is enough to advance resolutions, force debate, hold hearings, and create pressure that makes Trump respond. And if Trump's conduct becomes more extreme, or if the damage becomes more obvious, that group could grow from 5 to 7 to 10. And at some point, if enough Republicans are willing to vote against Trump on specific issues, you start to have real checks on his power, even without Democrats controlling Congress. That's the potential significance here. These votes demonstrate that defying Trump doesn't automatically end a senator's career, which could embolden more of them to stand up to him when they think the moment demands it. Now, politically, Trump's weakness with his own party is something Democrats are going to try to hammer on heading into 2026. Trump wants the narrative that he dominates the Republican Party and gets whatever he wants because everyone is too scared to cross him. But these Senate votes show that narrative isn't true. He's losing votes and getting embarrassed by his own Senate, even with Republicans holding a majority. And there's also an emotional, psychological dimension here that matters. Trump's rage at these defectors shows he knows his power is more fragile than he wants to admit. When he screams that senators who vote against him should never be elected again, when he calls them traitors and demands absolute loyalty, that isn't coming from strength. It's coming from fear and insecurity, because his power depends on maintaining the illusion of total control. Every time a Republican votes against him, that illusion cracks. And Trump knows once enough cracks appear, once enough Republicans decide they don't have to fear him anymore, his ability to dominate the party could weaken fast. That's why he reacts so furiously to even small defections. Not because 5 senators voting against him stops his policies right away, but because it signals more defections could follow. But you can't crush dissent by screaming forever. Eventually, threats lose power if you can't follow through. And Trump's ability to destroy senators' careers isn't as absolute as he pretends, especially when those senators can point to their votes as serving their constituents' interests and protecting constitutional limits. The strategic question for anyone who wants accountability is how to encourage and amplify these defections without making it politically toxic for Republicans to break ranks. If voting against Trump becomes framed as helping Democrats, then Republicans who might be inclined to resist him will stay in line. But if it can be framed as responsible conservatism, protecting constitutional principles and representing constituents against chaotic overreach, then more Republicans might be willing to do it. And here's the ultimate bottom line. These votes prove Trump doesn't have unlimited power. They prove Republicans will defy him when they think it's necessary. They prove his control over the party has real limits, even though he pretends it doesn't. That doesn't mean accountability is automatic or easy. It doesn't mean Republicans are going to impeach him or break with him across the board. But it does mean the idea that Trump controls everything and can't be checked is a myth. The reality is messier. Trump wins a lot, but he also loses some meaningful fights. And those cracks create openings for oversight and constraint if people understand them and push strategically.